Anderson Business Coaching inspires extraordinary organizational results by engaging the talents of ordinary people. ABC opens the communication links from the top to the bottom of the organization to tap into an untapped reserve of creative ideas and solutions by the people who do the work every day. Secondly, we identify external resources that have the experience and capability to develop systems and processes that the internal staff can manage.
Good morning, this is Ray Anderson. Welcome to another episode of Good-Hearted Leadership, the show that's specifically about people who do well by doing good. And today I have an episode that I think is rather fascinating in that we're going to be talking about facilitative leadership in a little different way than perhaps we have in the past. And I'm excited to have our guest speaker, Tom Hudson, to talk about his journey as he went through life trying to deal with communities in crisis. Having started his own firm in 1985 in community development, simply because he came out of a background which he realized that many times people were doing things not because they didn't want to, but they didn't understand the end goal. And so our objective in this is to kind of help you understand not only his journey, but how that can affect your leadership, whether you're in a government entity or you're in a private sector or in a nonprofit. Because leadership ultimately depends on how good you are in taking a crisis and bringing the best out of people into it. So having said that, I want to now turn to my guest, Tom Hudson. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to visit with you, Ray.
Thank you. So Tom, what I wanted to discuss with you, we've had a number of conversations, and part of your experience, having started way back when you were in Australia with the Aborigines, was understanding that sometimes, when government and private sector get together, they make decisions that are not necessarily in the best interest of the people involved and get the end. You have, from that experience in those 30 years of private sector work, have come up with 7 maxims that kind of help you. Help me a little bit explain that, and maybe you can start with the first, which is know the difference between a means and an end, and how does that apply to this? I'm curious.
It's a great way to start this conversation. Over the years, I've found myself very often working with organizations, businesses, and communities who are at the end of the rope. They've decided we need some kind of help, we can't get anywhere. And as I've come in to work with them and sort things out, as a strategist, of course, I'm very interested in where's it you want to go? What are your goals and objectives and so on? And I found a dramatic continuity over the years in many different contexts, a challenge that people aren't clear about, and that is very often, in fact, in most cases, when they're in crisis fighting each other, they're debating means. I want to develop this building or this site, or I want to work on this particular gateway in, or we want certain types of business to be attracted to our area, what have you. And so as I work with the warring parties, which is, I think, part of any leader's challenge, I help them become more clear about what are they trying to accomplish in the first place, the ends. The problem with two entities, any organizations, as we're seeing in politics today, on television, right? It's a lot of the conflict is about a particular means. Well, if I'm not clear about your end and you're not clear about my end, we can never, except by accident, come to any kind of an agreement, because there's no way for you to evaluate my means except through your methods, your ends, right. And vice versa.
And if I can interrupt here for a moment, I think that the tendency is we tend to go to the experience that works for us, whether it works in a collective or not. It might be helpful for you to explain a little bit, because I think you talked about you being a strategist. And in my experience, strategists tend to be ends-oriented. Like Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind. Tell us a little bit about that, because I'm trying to get you to kind of clarify for the audience why strategy is so important, and that ends to being able to bring people together.
Yeah. Well, we live in a world of limited resources. It's everything from our time, soccer moms being challenged with PTA or a soccer day, or corporate leaders who are finding themselves pulled by different initiatives and so on. So how do you manage those valuable resources? We've got to be very clear, not just about where we're going, but why we're going there. And to be ends-oriented, we can then be clear to others about why we would spend those limited resources or why we would move everybody in a particular direction. It gives people the opportunity to buy in, and it also gives them the opportunity to weigh the relative merit of those means.
Okay. Sure.
So what are the relative merits, except in the context of the ends? And so time after time I found that as we identify the ends and be real clear about them, then the warring parties, or the conflicted individuals can bring their different ideas together. And as often as not, I've found that people working collaboratively in good faith may find that neither one of their means was really the best possible way to move forward once they agreed on the ends. And then they say, well, maybe there's a better way for us to move forward.
Do you have an example of that where you applied it and it was able to bring parties together and move them in a direction that really made a difference in the community? Because I think the point that you made is that about limited resources, as we move forward, because of the limited resources, both communities, counties, and states have less and less money to deal with more and more problems, as we've seen in San Bernardino. So give us an example, if you can, of how this worked in another environment where we might be able to see what the benefit is here.
It's always easier to see by example, isn't it? As I share my examples, keep in mind that my filter in life has been primarily working with communities, but anybody can take these examples and apply them to their businesses or their nonprofits or their service organizations, or for that matter, Boy Scouts, of which I've been a part for many years, or Girl Scouts or Brownies, whatever it happens to be. We have communities.
Right.
So one example that I often reflect upon was a beautiful Victorian seaport town of Port Townsend, Washington. This was many years ago in the 1800s, supposed to be the end of the railroad, the National Railroad.
Right.
And then its port would open to the Far East and so on. So the community was built. It's absolutely extraordinary. But in many ways it was overbuilt for a long time because second and third floors of multi-story buildings were never occupied for multi-decades. At the time I was working with the community, I was brought in when it was already in crisis. They were trying to decide about next era. Where do we go from here to improve our economy? We're in difficult times. Tourism is too much a part of where we are, and it's not enough. There are other kinds of things we might want to be, but we want to be true to who we are. And there was an explosive situation going on there. There was a group of business people who had organized and called themselves Council Watch. And a word like Council Watch is just dripping with frustration and venom. And I think even though that was some years ago, many people today I think can see that. And it's unfortunate that it was there. That things had become so bad that people felt compelled to create a Council Watch. Well, meanwhile,
and if I can, I mean, it's what we see today. It's the anti-establishment. It's like
the anti-establishment. That's right. So, and these were not extremists in any way. These were people in the business community who were fed up. They said, all right, you're not going in the right direction. We fear your decisions or potential decisions, especially with waterfront development, which was so precious in the community. Well, meanwhile, the council had a tremendous amount of goodwill, and they were deeply frustrated. They thought they weren't being understood and so on. So they invited me to come in and try to help. I told them that the first thing I'd like to do is to go visit with Council Watch, which is not a traditional move in the chess match, right? You already know your position, win your position. Well, in a facilitative management or facilitative leadership environment, I think it's very important to understand where everybody's coming from. Okay. So I went to that group, I asked them what were their ends really, not just their means, which part of the waterfront do you want to develop or what have you, but why? What are you trying to accomplish? And as we got further and further into the why, there were many insights that had just not been discussed. When they weren't in the newspaper, they didn't show up at council meetings and so on. They just weren't that visible. I then went to the city council, asked, and the mayor, who was Brent Shirley at the time, asked them the same thing. What are you really trying to accomplish? And it was so insightful, because as we put the two different sets of ends up to compare, they were very, very consistent.
Yeah.
So then we had a platform. We had a foundation for discussion. We could understand each other. With that as a foundation, we started looking at different alternative forms of future development of the community, and especially its waterfront. And in very short order, we had a high degree of consensus and support. And at least so far as I know in the work that I was doing, there really wasn't a need for the confrontational council watch kind of an organization. The business people, I felt, were very mature strategists themselves in trying to then move forward with that agreed upon foundation.
Right.
And they did a magnificent job of collaborating, and within a short time they had a general plan or a comprehensive plan amendment that changed where they wanted to go, and a tremendous amount of sense of team and collaboration with many people in the community coming out and saying, oh, well, since we've got consensus, we're on board too.
Yeah.
Very powerful.
So I guess the proof is in the pudding. Did they actually execute on this?
Yes, they did.
Oh, cool. So what was the outcome?
Well, at the time there were 3 different areas of the waterfront that were in contention, as well as a harbor area. And there was a lot of concern among business people that the wrong waterfront form of development could impact the economy.
Sure.
In certain ways. Other people were saying, well, our ends aren't about the economy, very narrow ends.
Exactly.
Our ends are about, let's say, sense of community, or our ends are about environment, or what have you.
Yeah.
And with very narrow ends, they were having a lot of conflicts. Once they understood each other and found some common ground and saw that there was an opportunity to address multiple items, they went right after it. And in very short order, they were under construction with their first big project.
Cool. So in other words, they were able to say, look, we can create business out of this, we can protect the environment, and we can keep the community intact.
Yep.
Oh, that's so cool.
They became a team.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that you said that's kind of consistent with what you were saying is that once we have a better understanding of our values, that kind of eliminates some of the conflicts that you're seeing. Is that accurate? Because I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I truly think it's a proper kind of sequencing of thinking. Ends and means, as we've shared, are important to understand. But what's behind an end? And very often ends are founded in values. Quite often when organizations work with each other, corporations, or for that matter, corporate leaders working with employees, if they don't understand each other's values, they may be coming up with solutions that just don't work. I've also found that there are all kinds of goals out there that have absolutely no inspiration with them. And quite often my sense is that those goals don't have much contact with values. But you want to inspire people, speak to their values. I also just parenthetically would say, if you really want to connect with somebody and make them understand where you're coming from, start with understanding with where they're coming from. Do your homework. And whether that's an employee, another organization, another corporation, another level of government, whatever it happens to be. What are they really saying that's important to them beyond a particular end? It's the why there's that end.
Well, and that kind of, I know you have an example there. I'd like you to share, but it's kind of consistent with what you said, is that basically as your career evolved and you were working in communities and crisis, you kind of moved from being your own community development person and working with communities, like you just said, but ultimately coming to the conclusion that in order for this to be really effective, you had to be at where the boots were on the ground, where there was this connection between the community and the regulatory agencies that drive it. Give us a little insight as to how you made that transition, and then share the story of the Nez Perce, because I think there's really some gems inside of that connect these two together.
I think It's just as a student of community and someone who's, as an Army brat growing up in the Army, we had incredible community. I often compared my upbringing to everybody else's and why there was a strong sense of community in some places, not in others. And then what was the correlation between the degree of sense of community and the degree of success in the community?
Okay, all right.
I often found it was 1-to-1. It was very, very closely related. If you had a strong sense of community, you could accomplish all kinds of things. And one of the great American traditions we don't talk enough about anymore is barn raisings. Finding that common ground and helping each other. We can accomplish great things. I've been accused of being an optimist, but I'm too old to be able to say I'm a blind optimist. I've been through the wars and had my boots on the ground in a lot of places. What I have found is where there's a collective will, there's a way most of the time. So how do you get to that collective will? That's what I've been watching over there, is that evolution and so on that you're referring to, is why are some places more successful? That's where my maxims started to come in. Really, I was just being ascribed. It's not that I'm brilliant or fantastic at what I do, but I do think I'm a keen observer of success and failure both. So as I found these places of success, I looked into, well, why are they succeeding so well? And very often it had to do with a collective passion, that people were really bonded together for a common purpose. And what was behind that was often the common shared values. And what was behind that was that everybody knew what the values were. So very interesting context for a challenge that I was blessed to be able to be engaged in with the Nez Perce tribe, if you'd like to hear about that.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. I think that's an interesting story, because it's a great segue into how you can help a community in crisis by getting them and others who don't understand the values.
Yeah. Well, this was late 90s when all of this occurred. I'm from Nez Perce country in North Idaho, and feel a tremendous admiration for Nez Perce leaders over the years, one of the most noteworthy of whom was Chief Joseph. Prior to his day in the 1830s, the Nez Perce tribe was strongly influenced by a missionary who lived amongst them. The missionary was trying very hard in his way to help, and I'm not into the controversy of good or bad on missionary work, but one of the things he wanted to do was move people into Western clothing. So he condemned traditional clothing among the people in the Lewiston area and said, I will take those clothes from you and give you more Western clothes. Well, one of his challenges was he had to pay his way. Missions don't operate with nothing. So he sold this clothing and all kinds of other cultural materials back to a friend of his in Ohio. This friend of his kept the collection for many years and eventually gave the whole entire collection to Oberlin College. It was an extraordinary collection, as history has shown. It became the most valuable, most comprehensive, most incredible collection of Plateau Indians in the world. Well, Oberlin College got this for free, then shared it with the Nez Perce tribe, let the Nez Perce tribe display it at the Spalding Museum just outside of Lewiston, Idaho for many years. And at some point, the Ohio Historical Society worked with Oberlin College, convinced them to give the collection to the Ohio Historical Society, and here's where the rub came. They insisted on bringing the collection back, and because they were in financial troubles, they wanted to sell the collection at auction. So here was a collection that had already found its way back to the people in the Nez Perce, and the collection was from the 1830s, so people knew that this was Chief Timothy's band. They knew the individuals who had owned these materials. The cultural richness was just incredible. And suddenly, they were going to be auctioned off to the highest bidder, one piece at a time.
Wow.
The tribe pleaded with the Historical Society not to sell it. Now, by the way, the Historical Society had as one of its values the recovery of historical items or prehistorical items of Native Americans and then bringing them back to the tribes in Ohio. But in this case, they decided to try to sell. The only answer that came back from the Historical Society was, well, if you can get $608,100 in 5 months, we'll sell the whole collection to you. And there was the challenge. Well, this was a community in crisis in the sense of this incredible body of materials that spoke so much about their history that was irreplaceable, priceless in every sense. But it was a small tribe, less than 3,000 people in rural North Idaho and in other areas, but their headquarters was in Lapwai. And so what were they to do? I learned about this and lived relatively close by and went to the tribe and suggested that I would like to help with this. As a strategist, I felt I could be of some assistance. There came the blessing. I was embraced, and we formed a team of elders in the tribe who worked with me as guides and advisors, and we went after this. Well, what was the first thing I did? What are your ends? And they were pretty straightforward about it, as we need the collection back. And I said, I really don't think you're going to get it back with that one end. $608,000 from bake sales and local things, it's just not going to be possible in 5 months. So let's talk about other things that you as a tribe embrace that are valuable to you. Let's talk about your heritage. What would Chief Timothy say? What would Chief Joseph say? And so on. It was a wonderful conversation. Among other things, they said, well, people don't understand us. They don't know who we are. What if America, one of our goals was, or our ends was, to have America understand we Native Americans today, our values, the personal value, the cultural value we hold to these pieces in the collection and so on. And what if America became our partner and they co-owned this challenge with us? So we broadened our ends, and how did we do it? By going to our values. And our position was, if America hears these values, they'll own those values too. They will understand us. This won't be a little blurb in some newspaper about some remote tribe that needs money. It'll be about, we as Americans have common ground in this. This collection belongs with the tribe. Let's work together. So we went after it, and it was one of the most breathtaking experiences I've ever had, or for that matter, ever read about. In very short order, we had, among others, Bob Edwards at Morning Edition on National Public Radio telling the entire nation about what we were doing. MTV gave us 176 radio spots and hundreds of TV spots to tell the world about our challenge. We had the Denver Post, the Washington Post, the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, the Oregonian, the Seattle Times, newspapers all over the country telling our stories. USA Today loved it and continually gave great articles throughout this process. We started a program, a campaign based upon values, where we said, look, we know that originally the missionary received $59.10 for the total collection. So let's go to America and not ask everybody for big checks, but raise $59.10 and send it to us. And we had a gift for each person that would do that. We also challenged schools, young people around the nation, because what was the end? The end, in this case, wasn't get the collection back. It was to share the culture, to teach people about our history. So going to schools all over the country. We had a school in Arkansas, for example, that started after the $59.10, and they were selling the right to chew gum at school that day, or to wear a hat in class, or what have you. They went out and found partners like Walmart in that particular town. And in the end, that one little elementary school raised $3,000 for us. Pearl Jam, the extraordinary rock group, came out and endorsed us and supported us. Pete Droge, President of the United States of America, another rock organization, came out and supported us. In Baltimore, we had a restaurant that had the Chief Joseph plate. And everybody that ordered that plate, every penny that came from that went back to the tribe. In short, with all kinds of people embracing our values, understanding our ends, they helped us as a team bring back the collection. We raised the money with 3 days to spare, And to this day, people continue to come to Lapwai, to the Spalding Museum, which is a national park museum in partnership with the tribe, to see what they co-owned, what they partnered with. That sense of ownership and pride did amazing things. As a team, we accomplished great things. And my role in that was to be a facilitative leader, not to bring everybody along to where I wanted to go, but people.
Yeah, that's amazing. And this kind of goes to the third maxim you put together, because it's basically, obviously that engaged you in very deep ways. And what you talked about here is an informed majority will make a good decision. And so, what you did in that particular context is to inform everybody, share values, and make them move forward. Given that that's kind of your goal, tell us how your career has now led you here to San Bernardino, where it would seem like a lot of the flexibility is gone. Why here? Why now? Why this?
I'm sure any number of people would wonder how somebody starts early on in anthropology, as I did, working in archaeology in Australia, through international trade for a few years, and ultimately into community
and the
development.
Peace Corps.
Yeah, Peace Corps too. But spending most of my career in business and then finding myself in government. I think many of us in this world are about making the world a better place.
Right.
And that's the essence of who I am. Being an Army brat, I was trained to serve, and I'm a total believer. So I have an obligation to fulfill in that area. That's my driving mission in life. So then the only question, if that's the end, what are the means? Over the years, I found.
All right.
You see, I'm living my principles here,
that's good.
and my maxims. So for a significant number of years, I found a tremendous amount of satisfaction from working with communities around the country, where I was a prime advisor for what might be a strategic plan or a community issue, challenge, opportunity, what have you.
And a role of facilitative leadership.
In facilitative leadership. Yeah. And it worked well for me. And in a number of cases, I would do the planning and then maybe stay on board for a time and help them start a new nonprofit, 501c3, to do the community development work or facilitate it with the principle of engaging in self-help, capacity building, essentially. Because you can't just have a plan, you got to have a program and be moving. And I'm all about building prototypes. Well, early on, many of my partners in the resource arena were at the federal level, USDA Rural Development, the Economic Development Administration, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and so on. Wonderful partners. Well, we all know that their funding stream has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. A check from the federal government is getting pretty rare these days. Right. And then same thing has happened with our states. And it's not because the state government and federal government are bad, but we've been through economically bad times. We're in a new era. Very difficult to expect outsiders to help us. So I've become more of a believer in what I call localism. How do we do things ourselves? Working as a consultant from the outside has its advantages, but inevitably it's contractual, so it's short term. I found that as I grew in this, I wanted to have more of a stake, and I also wanted to be as close to the decision making at the local level as I could be. While I was up in the Pacific Northwest, I heard about this tremendous CEO, Greg Devereaux, down in San Bernardino County, who was taking an entrepreneurial approach to community development. He and his board of supervisors, our legislators, had built this partnership in a county that was facing tremendous challenges in a number of ways that were my challenges, the things that I've devoted my life to. And I was given the opportunity to come and join that team. And I thought, okay, localism is where I want to be. My ends are community, all around community. And my values are about service and really creating prototypes that embrace and reflect the maxims. So I'm here and now find a tremendous number of opportunities to engage in those maxims and help restore and build strength and trust in government, helping government be clear that we're in a new era where we're not the regulators of things as our only end. Of course, we have to regulate and make sure the world is safe, but we can also be entrepreneurs ourselves, and we can be solutions-oriented as partners in helping other cities, other towns, institutions like our Loma Linda University and Cal State San Bernardino, other entities out there, nonprofits, service organizations, Building Industry Association, helping them as partners to lift the county up collectively while adhering to certain fundamental principles or the maxims that I'm talking about.
Tom, this has been really, for me, it's been really informative because, there's this resistance to government. But as you've laid this thing out, it's been very, very informative to me to see how it all comes together based on your passion. How are you going to apply this here? Tell us a little bit more, because this, not only do we have a county that's had a huge impact, but we've also had a recent one in the city of San Bernardino. Tell us a little bit how you're going to take this community in crisis and your role, and how's that going to affect you, and how's it going to affect us, and how's it going to accomplish your goal?
Well, truly, the county has suffered, although today it's under great management, and while we are absolutely frugal and devoted to budgets that are respectful of community values, we're making great headway in this phase of our recovery from the recession. And I see great things happening at the city as well. It's inspiring to be their partners. But let's look at the essence of the situation. In this downturn, there wasn't just economic loss. I think there was a tremendous loss in faith and trust in government. And that's one of our key challenges as we move forward. We've got to have both a short-term and a long-term perspective of what we want to do. Where are we going? If you don't know where you're going, any road will do, and we'll certainly get there, won't we?
Yeah.
But it will do nothing for us. So we've got to be careful about that, and I think the county's view is we want to do that as a team. The county has embraced an informed majority will make a good decision in a lot of different ways. For example, we are working very closely with cities and towns now to meet with at least 4 every quarter in my department to understand where they're going, what they want to do. We try to work very closely with them on edge development, that is unincorporated development near or adjacent to the cities and towns of the county. We're learning a lot. We're becoming an informed group by reaching out and listening. And one of the best way to become informed is to listen. I think we have very active listeners in our leadership. But we also want to make sure that our constituents are highly informed about what's going on. And we too understand not just their situation, not just their goals, but all of their ends and the values behind them. So it's mutual listening that's here. So imagine the largest county in the United States. We're larger than 9 states. In population, we're larger than 13 states. We have a lot of challenges in regard to our geography. So that means some really strong emphasis on getting out to our constituents and listening. We're now engaged in both a new era countywide plan, what has in the past been called a general plan. This one's going to be much more business-like and very community-based. And we're also engaged in updates of all of our community plans. Well, in the past, despite the large size of the county, we had 14 community plans. Well, if you think about it, there are emerging communities in the unincorporated areas all over the county, each of which has their own needs and each of which is making decisions every day that affect their future. We believe in building a continuum of planning services to all the communities in the county, wherever they are in population or goals or objectives, ends, and so on, so that we can engage with them and make sure that each step is a step toward their end, rather than a random one or one that ultimately may work against their strategic interests. So we are now in and very immersed in a new phase of facilitative leadership, where we're working with the communities to hear them out, making sure they've got good information, making sure we as well are learning from them on controversial issues like renewable energy, water, conservation, tourism development, and so We have these challenges ahead of us, but I think I believe this, and again, I'm accused of being an optimist. I believe that we are gaining more trust among our constituents, especially through the incredible leadership from our board and our CEO. They're living it every day. They're being open, and they're engaging people and embracing these maxims in ways that inspire me to be here.
No, and that's a good way to kind of segue into a conclusion on this, Tom. Is that, you know, as I've had the privilege of talking to you and actually learning more about what you're doing, you know, one of those initiatives that you're doing is permitting people who are individuals in the community to actually look on your website for land use and, you know, come up with something as simple as, how do I do a farmer's market? In which, you know, your purpose is not only to control them, but to educate, inform, and move them in a direction that is consistent with their ends and their means. You know, obviously we're almost out of time here. I can't go into the rest of your maxims, and I think we've touched on 3. You've got 4 more. What I'd like to tell the audience is this has been a real pleasure meeting with Tom today. What we're going to make available to you is Tom has graciously permitted us to publish this in our next issue of California CEO magazine, so you can see all of them. Tom, it's been a real pleasure. Would you let us know how people can reach you if they want to talk to you and learn more about what you've done in terms of this facilitative leadership?
Well, as you can imagine, we're committed to collaboration, which means we need to be accessible. Anybody can get on the county website. We're easy to find. Just look up San Bernardino County. It'll be the first thing you see. Land Use Services is one of the easy departments to find, and we have 5 divisions of incredibly well-trained people who are devoted to public safety, to being solutions-oriented, and to great customer service. I will say this, we don't whitewash anything where I come from. We are people who live with limited resources. There are times when people who call us have to wait too long on the phone. There are times when it takes too long for us to get out and do an inspection, but we're doing the level best we can with goodwill and then a solutions-oriented approach to help make this county a better place.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And again, join us next month. We're going to have another conversation about how a collaboration between governments and private industry has really helped a lot. We're going to be talking to IEHP about how they reached out to their customers and reduced their emergency room usage by 68%. Thank you very much.
Anderson Business Coaching inspires extraordinary organizational results by engaging the talents of ordinary people. ABC opens the communication links from the top to the bottom of the organization to tap into an untapped reserve of creative ideas and solutions by the people who do the work every day. Secondly, we identify external resources that have the experience and capability to develop systems and processes that the internal staff can manage.